Welcome to the Town of Derry Planning Board meeting for November 6th, 2024. We normally start our meetings with a Pledge of Allegiance. If you would rise and join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll go through some technical housekeeping first. We are continuing to offer remote participation on a voluntary basis. If we have planning board members who are seated who are remote, all votes shall be by roll call. To attend the meeting, there's two ways: using a computer or smart device. Visit www.zoom.us. There's a meeting ID 754-663-912. You may also call in for audio only. The number is 646-558-8656. Meeting ID is the same, 754-663-912. If you're on the phone, hit a *9 to raise your hand to be recognized. And then once you're recognized, hit a *6 to unmute yourself to participate. If you have problems getting into the meeting, please call 603-845-5585. I will now introduce the members of staff who are present this evening. To my far right is Ms. Robideau, the Planning Director.
Good evening.
To the rear is Ms. Cavallo, the Clerk. Mr. Chase, who is the Town Administrator's representative.
Good evening.
Member, Mr. Healy.
Good evening.
Vice Chair, Mr. O'Connor.
Good evening.
And to my far left is our media coordinator. Close enough? Close enough. Doing all the remote broadcasting, we have Mr. LaRue, who's the engineering representative.
Good evening.
We have a brand new alternate with us, Mr. Mousy.
Good evening.
We have Mr. Fishman.
Good evening.
Regular member. We have Mr. Feinauer. Good evening. We have Mr. Myers, all regular members, and Secretary Mr. Malaby.
Good evening.
I'm Dave Nelson. I'm currently the chair. Please silence your devices during the meeting. In the unlikely event of alarm activation, the exits are to the rear of the hall, and you may also use the one to my right to your left. However, the elevator will not be operable. If you require elevator assistance, please wait for first responders. We have now some administrative business, and the first item is escrow. The first one is item number 24-31, project named Subdivision of 5 Mount Pleasant Street, FW Holdings, cash escrow, and the parcel ID is 32071, again, 5 Mount Pleasant Street. Ms. Robideau?
So the request is to establish cash escrow in the amount of $22,885 for this project. It would be non-interest bearing.
Okay. Any questions?
Mr. Chair, seeing no questions coming up, I shall move the article.
Second. Moved by O'Connor, seconded by Malaby to accept the escrow as presented. All, will poll the board. Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Mr. Healy?
Yes.
Mr. O'Connor?
Yes.
I don't think we have any vacancies, so we can't seat Mr. Mousy. So, Mr. Fishman?
Yes.
Mr. Feinauer?
Yes.
Mr. Myers?
Yes.
Mr. Malaby?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Next item in the package is item number 24-32. Project named Derry Plumbing and Heating for a new building, 71 Birch Street LLC, and the PID is 28002 71 Birch Street. Ms. Robideau?
Okay, the request is to establish letter of credit 82461840, drawn on Enterprise Bank in the amount of $96,634.50. The expiration date for this project will be October 28th, 2025.
Any questions? Not?
Mr. Chair, I so move.
Second. Moved by O'Connor, seconded by Malamy to accept the letter of credit as presented. Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Mr. Healy?
Yes.
Mr. O'Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Fishman?
Yes.
Mr. Feinauer?
Yes.
Mr. Malaby?
Yes.
And Mr. Myers?
Yes.
Chair votes yes. Okay, next item is a release form for parcel ID 06040-001. Maybe you would please review this release for us, Ms. Roden?
Okay, so this is a request to do the final release of letter of credit 1, drawn on Washington Savings Bank in the amount of $15,422.40. This is for a 6-lot subdivision off of Alyssa and Mill Road. All of those lots, the last lot is now being constructed.
And Mr. Chair, I also move.
Second.
It has been moved by O'Connor, seconded by Malaby to approve the final release as presented. Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Mr. Healy?
Yes.
Mr. O'Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Fishman?
Yes.
Mr. Feinauer?
Yes.
Mr. Myers?
Yes.
Mr. Malaby?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. This one needs to be signed. Next item in the package is item 24-34, a project named Franklin Meadows Condominiums, developer McMaster Development. The parcel ID is 30070 for 16 Franklin Street. Ms. Rodo?
Okay, the request is for the final release of, this is actually cash escrow, in the amount of $20,090.50, missing a decimal there. The amount to retain is 0. This is a non-interest-bearing account, and this is for the 3-unit townhouse right behind Town Hall.
Okay. I actually have one question on this for Mr. Chase. When we were reviewing this, you made some comment about what the street address should be given their driveway location. You remember, this is the one when it had the fire.
Yes, because normally the address goes with the driveway.
And I notice it doesn't, it goes with Franklin Street, so.
Yes,
Is that okay with the fire department, do you think?
I believe so, yes.
It was assigned by Fire Marshal
Yeah.
Eastman.
Okay. I just remembered that's not what we talked about, so I thought I would ask. Okay. Any other questions or comments on this one?
If not, then also move this one.
Second.
So it's been moved by O'Connor, seconded by Malamy to approve the release as presented. Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Mr. Healy?
Yes.
Mr. O'Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Fishman?
Yes.
Mr. Feinauer?
Yes.
Mr. Myers?
Yes.
Mr. Malaby?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. And the last one in the escrow package is for parcel ID 30070.
We just did that one.
Huh?
That's Franklin Street.
Okay, I'm confused now. Huh?
Yeah, there were 4.
There's another thing that is,
It's a duplicate?
I don't know, maybe, okay. If we
All right.
covered it, we
Give it to
covered
the
it.
secretary.
Hey, thanks a lot.
All right, so maybe this is just the actual thing we have to sign?
Yes, please.
Okay. That's my point of confusion, great. Moving on to approval of minutes. We have before us the minutes of October 16th. Has everyone had a chance to review those? Is there any errors or omissions?
Mr. Chair, seeing nobody raise their hands, then I'll move to accept the minutes as written.
Second.
Moved by O'Connor, seconded by Malaby to approve the minutes as written. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Any abstentions? Okay, minutes are approved unanimously. We'll now move on to correspondence.
It delights me to say we do have some correspondence today. We have a change of use form, a quarterly form for all the businesses that have changed in Derry since July, and I'm pleased to announce that we have almost 20 new businesses in the town.
So members can review that, and if there were questions about any of that, we can, request more information. These are things that are handled administratively and do not come to the board, so I suggested that we get like a quarterly wrap-up so that we know what's going on.
Mhm.
Because honestly, I'm the last one in town who knows new businesses coming in.
Sometimes I am as well.
I think the first one, never mind, I won't even go into that. There's someone who just knows everything. All right. That's it for correspondence. Other business, we have a approval extension request
Mhm.
in the package.
So the board had approved a 3-lot subdivision for Paul Doolittle, and he has asked to extend his conditional approval. He's still trying to get his escrow in place for the project.
Okay, any questions on that?
Is this his first, second one?
This is the first request.
First request.
What's the board's pleasure?
I move to accept his 6-month extension request.
Second.
Moved by O'Connor, seconded by Malamey to approve a 6-month extension for the aforementioned subdivision plan. I will poll the board. Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Mr. Healy?
Yes.
Mr. O'Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Fishman?
Yes.
Mr. Feinauer?
Yes.
Mr. Myers?
Yes.
Mr. Malamey?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. We next have planning director and chairman updates.
Okay, I'll try and make these quick, because I know we have a lot to do tonight. Auburn Planning Board forwarded a notice of public hearing for John Maravellis and Matthew Maravellis. It is a waiver request for a common driveway. The lot itself is actually in Derry. It's an approved lot of record that we have as 17.5 Ledgewood, but the access comes through Boxwood Drive in Auburn. The fire department has reviewed it, DPW has reviewed it, and so this is really just to let you know that Auburn is going to be holding a public hearing on it on November 20th.
Okay, but it's FYI, we have no action to actually take.
There is no action, it's just to let you know that it's an approved lot of record. It's been approved for a very long time. It's landlocked in Derry. The only way to access it would be through Auburn.
Okay.
And when they set up Boxwood, when they approved Boxwood Estates back in the early 2000s, they approved it knowing that they would need to leave access to that lot.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you. Under chairman updates, I'm happy to report 2 of our 3 alternate seats are now filled, but I feel obligated to say there's still one for any interested citizen who thinks we're having a lot of fun here and would like to come help us.
Okay.
You may apply on the town's website.
I had one other item, if I could.
One other item?
One other. Just a reminder for those that can, if you could go online to BEA and please take your test for the planning board handbook. The application's all ready to be sent to the state, and I'm just waiting for certificates from the board members so that we can get points on that. And plus, it hits your training for the year per our policies and procedures.
Okay.
So we've received a couple, and so if 3 more of you could do it, that would be wonderful.
Okay, and when is the absolute hard deadline?
If we could have that done by next Monday, that would be extremely helpful.
Okay. I'll take a look at, should be able to maybe do that. Now, the election's over.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
Just wanted to follow up on the Salem Casino items. The board had asked me to look for, kind of list out the gambling addiction facilities that might be in the area. There were a couple, New Hampshire Rapid Response Access Point, Smart Recovery, and there's some gambling anonymous meeting locations in the southern New Hampshire region. As far as the list of local charities that we might ask Salem to consider, the state itself will set that. So my thought was that I could just send the letter to Jacob LaFontaine in Salem and let him know that, Derry doesn't have an issue with the project, and that we would like them to consider if funding goes towards charities to give dairy charities some priority and to make sure that any funding for facilities for treatment, that they also do it region-wide, and that could be in the letter to Jacob. And I didn't know if there's anything else the board needed to include.
Okay, great. And there's still time to do that? Because I did read, I think it was in the Derry News, that there was a hearing and the Derry was granted a butter status, but they heard nothing from the Derry Planning Board. So,
I have been in discussion with Jacob all this since we've met.
okay, great, thank you.
Okay, all right.
Anything else?
Nope, I handed out the master plan kind of matrix. You all should have a copy of that. And anything highlighted, we have hit at least one or two of the goals. And I'm working on a more in-depth analysis to see what we need to complete for goals, and I'll keep you updated. And that is it.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you.
So we have a public hearing tonight for Keystone Dairy LLC, parcel ID 0503974 Rockingham Road, acceptance and review of an amended site plan to relocate a building and associated parking.
Okay. You all have the staff report in front of you, so I'm just going to hit the highlights. In August of '22, the planning board approved a conditional use permit to allow a mixed-use development at 74 Rockingham Road. That was 104 residential units that included townhomes and apartments, a community center, and a commercial building. The site is currently under construction. The applicant is before the board this evening to request permission to relocate the commercial building. Essentially, what they're doing is they're flopping the building and the parking lot to bring the parking lot to the front. This will create a safer environment. Parking calculations, there's a slight decrease by 5 spaces from the previous approval, but they still exceed what is required for the entire project. Concerns or comments from town staff. Planning would support the proposed change. I would note the fire department did not sign the TRC signature block. The Derry Fire Marshal would like the aisle width to be 20 feet. If the board approves the waiver submitted by the applicant for the, not having to have the fire department sign the TRC plan, a waiver from the state fire marshal's office may be required. The fire marshal was also concerned that the ladder bucket truck would have conflicts with maturing vegetation and or the edge of pavement along the back of the building, which was another reason why he wanted the 20 feet. 20 feet is NFPA. Our regulations say for one-way circulation, it shall be 18 feet. And that's the conflict. The town engineer had some field change plan edits he'd like incorporated into the final plan set. And if the board approves the proposal this evening, we would request that you include, that you condition the approval on submitting a fully revised plan set, including those edits to planning and DPW. I did hear from 2 abutters, actually, one at 95 Rockingham Road who expressed her displeasure with this project. And I also had a call from another lady today who said she would likely be watching the meeting. One other item, the applicant has been made aware that contractor use, which would be the plumbing and heating business proposed for the commercial building, will need a variance by the ZBA. Because contractor itself is not a permitted use in this zone, similar to the discussion we had with regarding stiletto last meeting. There's 4 waiver requests for you, so it's recommended that you review the proposed plan and waiver requests and also discuss the appropriateness of the plumbing and heating business on this lot during your discussion. Tim Peliquin and Jordan Young are here this evening to present, and the owner is also present.
All right, I will note for the record that Mr. Grenice is now present and seated.
Good evening. I apologize. I had a scheduled non-public town council meeting that just ended late.
Cool. So this is an amended site plan for the development at 74 Rockingham Road Residences at Sky to move one of the buildings. Okay? So at this point, let's open the public hearing, get a presentation from the developer, so may I have a motion to open the public
We
hearing?
have to
Oh,
accept
jurisdiction first, please.
Yeah, this is actually a formal
It
plan.
is, yeah.
All right. And where's my motion maker?
Mr. Chair, I shall move to accept
Here
jurisdiction.
we are. Moved by O'Connor to accept jurisdiction,
Second.
seconded by Malaby. Poll the board. Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Healy,
Yes.
Mr. Grenice,
Yes.
Mr. O'Connor,
Yes.
Mr. Fishman.
Yes.
Mr. Feinauer,
Yes.
Mr. Myers,
Yes.
Mr. Malaby.
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. So we would now invite the owners and engineers to
Mr.
summarize
Chair,
their,
I move to open up the public hearing.
Second.
all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Public hearing is open.
Okay, great. Good evening. For the record, my name's Tim Peloquin. I'm a licensed land surveyor, and my company is Promise Land Survey. Sitting next to me is Jordan Young, a civil engineer, professional engineer with Atlantic Engineering. And in the audience is Bob McCormick, who is the owner of the project of Keystone Dairy LLC, as well as his father-in-law named Paul Starkey, and then also Tom Lannon is part of this project as the doing the site work on the project currently. So we have a team of people if you have any questions as we go through this. So this project was approved in 2022, as your planner has suggested or informed you. And so these are approved plans that we were moving ahead with, and it's being constructed, as you may see if you've driven by there. The current office building that's termed, it's actually called Office Building 1. It's the first building on the right of what's called Scottish Way. That particular building is being requested to be moved back. And I will say that request has come from the town based on the project across the street that is approved or going through the approval process, where the old junkyard is, as to they needed to realign a little bit of Route 28. So for better traffic flow, straightening out a curve a little bit. And so as a result, we're not giving up any land, but our building shoehorned right up against the right-of-way where it was designed is now, it had some concerns for the town staff. So we agreed that we would move it back through this process, through this meeting. We have the right to build it where it is up front, to be clear, but this is a betterment to move it back. When we move it back, I just want to say that we're shoehorned between a wetland to the back and the right-of-way in the front. Actually, I'm going to back up just a little bit to say the reason the building was in the front is because of your regulation within that zone. That zone requires no parking in the front of the building. So that was something that we had, a hurdle that we had to jump, and here we are today, where we are going to be allowed parking in the front of the building. And as a result, we're looking to have one-way traffic around the building, because that's the only way to do this, by moving the building back. We made the width of the building 7.5 feet less already. So we've made our building slightly smaller. It's as small as we can go. And by doing that, we're allowed 18-foot aisles, which your town regulations would say is okay. And I will say that's the norm throughout the state of New Hampshire in a one-way traffic flow. 18 feet is sufficient. Your fire department obviously asked for 20. We can't do it. That's what I would tell you, because that 4 feet is critical to the wetland, to a detention pond that's designed on each side, and we cannot accommodate that. We respected all other regulations in terms of the parking spaces, the widths, the sizes. We put retaining walls as part of this. This is more costly, I will say, to do, because there's significant retaining walls and other things, but it's a betterment. It will look better, push back a little bit. One-way traffic around the building is a good thing. It will, before, the building did not have flow around the whole building, but now it does. We have 360-degree flow around the building. That's a betterment. We did demonstrate to the fire department that their fire truck, their largest fire truck that they can drive around there without hitting any cars that are parked in the parking spaces. But their wheels will stay on the pavement throughout. But what happens is sometimes their back of their truck, might go over the curb a little bit, but it will clear it if you follow. And that's only if cars are parked there, and they're parked right at the edge of the 20-foot lane aisle, where people usually pull in further than that. So I just want to be clear, the practicality of this is it works. And so that's one thing, so it's a safety thing. So we're limited. 18-foot aisles, our access, our building has been slightly reduced in size. And then the last thing I just want to mention is pending, if you guys do approve this evening, that we push the building back a little bit per the town's request, we are asking, when this was approved in 2022, what was asked is for us to build the commercial building first. And I know why. It's pretty obvious, because you didn't want residential to be all built out and then a commercial building come later. So we recognize that, we respect that. However, construction's well underway out here. They're getting ready to pour what I'm gonna call the condos, the 10 units to the left, which are termed 64 Rockingham Road. So there's a sixplex and a fourplex that are part of this. We're asking for construction of those to go first. And then secondly, and simultaneously, we're gonna ask that buildings 1 and buildings 4, building 1 being the commercial building, and building 4, the large building to the back left, be constructed simultaneously. And the reason is because of contractors, because of efficiency and flow, and we're asking that those 2 buildings be done simultaneously. And then followed by building 2 and then building 3. So building 2 is the community center that will be incidental for the use of the residences of this place, as well as will have access to public rental of that facility for meeting space. So that's one thing we're going to ask for as if this moves towards a conditional approval is construction sequence. The good news is the contractor is working 90 miles an hour out there. They're going to do a really good job. It's going to be a fantastic, great looking buildings when it's done. I think everybody's going to agree with that. I've seen this very development before from this developer, and it's 5-star, so to speak. That's about all I have. Jordan, did I miss anything? Okay, so that's the. Yeah. So to be clear of what I had said, the 10 units, the 4 unit and the 6 unit, we're looking to be able to build those, get certificate of occupancies while the others are being constructed, because those are ready to go. And that will help cash flow and other things on this project. The good news is this is going 90 miles an hour, and it will continue to until completion. It's fully funded by a bank, et cetera. So, okay, with that, I'll pause and try to answer any questions the board would have, or perhaps members of the public. Thank you.
Are there any members of the public who have questions or comments would like to address this plan? None online, none in the room, so back to the board. Anyone have questions or comments? Mr. Grenius.
Thank you. Tim, so from the original plan we approved, like you said, the only change that is building 1, moving back,
Yes.
and then you made it, what, 7.5 feet smaller?
The width,
The width?
7.5 feet, because by moving it back, we're shoehorned between the wetland, the 18-foot aisle, the 20-foot parking spaces, and a detention pond.
Okay.
Literally, there was no more room. So we had to shorten the building as it was.
And then I have a question on sheet 4.4, the Derry fire truck. I see a red and a green line, so I'm assuming it's the 2 different size vehicles?
Yeah, I can speak on that.
Thank you.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So, the top right is a legend. The bright, if we can turn to that last page, please.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to see the blacked out area.
No,
Talking
right below
this.
that. Right below that is what I'm referring to. It says legend.
Oh, okay, yep.
So you can see the bright green is the outside path of the vehicle, not meaning what touches the pavement, what the corners of the truck will pass over. The red is the actual tires, the wheels, and those stay on the pavement all the way around. So there's a couple areas that do swing over the curb.
Yep.
But we can avoid any vegetation in those areas. It's just 3 little areas where it just barely passes over the curb. But I want to repeat, everything stays within the curbs.
All right, thank you.
Other comments or questions? I have a follow-up to Mr. Grenice's discussion. So I understand that vehicles of that nature have a wheelbase such that there's a tail, and that's the part that's swinging out over the curb, and you're going to restrict plantings. But what about snow removal? If we have a snowy, icy winter, fire trucks might be robust enough to crash through the snow, but it might not do their surface, paint any good. So have you given thought to the areas where the curb will be exceeded? Any special treatment for snow removal in that area?
We do have snow storage in that area, slightly. So, it's a good question. I think that we need to create a clear note on the plan that
You just move it there.
you can move it to the front, can't you?
I mean, I guess I'm thinking that you maybe need something like a wing plow to clear
Exactly.
above the
There's only one slight
pavement,
area. There's
yeah.
only one slight area that we're talking that could come into effect with a 6-foot snowbank that's right up against the curb. So in the areas that we're showing no planting, we'll extend that to say, or snow storage. I think that's the way to create that. Additionally, Jordan has just pointed out, we can put snow storage for the people, for the people that would be maintaining this, which will be hired by McCormick, by Mr. McCormick, that they have a clear guideline where they can store snow. And there is an area also on this site that the snow can be stored in the front. Not in the front, I'm sorry, on the side towards Scottish Way. Want to describe it?
Yeah, there's several places on the site plan that we can store snow. If we need to move that snow storage area, we're more than capable of doing that.
Okay.
Yes.
I want to follow up a little bit about the town's requirements for one-way access ways versus the NFPA standard, whose number I don't remember. I was actually going to look at it, but typically with NFPA, you have to be a member, or you have to pay to look at it, so I wasn't able to. Is there anyone present who actually understands what that section says? And is the 20 feet for only one way? Is it for two-way? I mean, there are any ifs, ands, and buts about that? I'd like to learn as much as we can before we have to decide.
Can you answer that, Randy? We're all looking at you.
I noticed that. So what it mainly is is it helps with radiuses turning. And it also helps, depending on the truck, with the setup. Some trucks, especially ladder trucks, they're outriggers.
Outriggers, yeah.
They take our former truck needed 20 feet for outriggers. The new ones are smaller and they don't need quite as much space. The other thing, and I understand what he's talking about, the plantings, is the bucket has a significant overhang in front of the truck, and it hangs down some. And like one of our nemeses was when you pull into the post office, you take your left, you take a right, and then when you make the left-hand swing, they put a one-way sign right there, and unless you hit it exactly on the pinpoint, the bucket whacked that sign every time you pulled it in, every time. There was one spot that you could miss it, but if you didn't hit that perfect, and so that's a tight radius there. It eliminates things like that. NFPA regulates how high the sign can be, what the radiuses have to be, what they want the width to be, to give working room, not only with the ladder trucks with the outriggers, but when you're parked there, you're trying to pull equipment off the sides of the truck, especially if you're in between parking spaces. The truck is 8.5 feet wide. Then your doors open, depending on what kind of door you have, they're 3 foot, and then you're trying to pull equipment out. It takes up a lot of space very quickly. So, in a nutshell, that's basically what those regulations are made for.
And are they best practices or are they mandatory minimums?
Well, NFPA is, some people call them best practices, some call, it depends on the state, how they
Adopt them?
enforce the NFPA standards, correct. To some states, they may be, or some towns, they may be a Bible. You will adhere to these, or, you cannot do it. Some states and municipalities use them as best practices.
Well, I
you know-
noticed that there was commentary about if the planning board were to grant a waiver, and I'm a little confused about what we're actually waiving, because we can't waive NFPA, that's not within our control. We can waive
No.
our land development control regulations, which says 18 feet, so, and
Yeah.
there might be a requirement for a state waiver or permit. And so who actually controls this, the planning board or the
Yeah.
state?
Yeah, let me explain that a little bit better. The Derry Fire Marshal, Director Eastman, said that because he takes it literal for NFPA as opposed to best practice, in a single direction of traffic shall be 20 feet. Our regulations allow 18. So because of that, he did not sign the TRC block. So the waiver request for the board this evening is to not have the fire department signature on the TRC block. Additionally, when I spoke with Director Eastman, I said, well, what do we do if, you're not, what do we do about this width? And he said that if the planning board approved it at 18 feet, the applicant could submit a waiver to Fire Marshal Toomey at the state for a waiver from that NFPA requirement. It's separate. We did that for LaBelle Winery.
I guess I'm a little ignorant about NFPA's fire codes. Typically controls like the structure and whatnot. It sounds like NFPA is getting into land use planning. And so that's an interesting jurisdictional quagmire, especially if the town has a regulation that says 18 feet and NFPA says 20, and the Derry Fire Marshal is routinely going to request that or not sign. Then we need to figure out at some point, maybe not for this plan, but going forward, how to fix that impasse and that disconnect.
I'm happy to have, to set up a conversation with Fire Marshal Toomey and see how he wants us to handle these moving forward.
I guess if we decide to waive the fire department signature and go with the 18 feet, and the state is going to insist on getting a waiver, or they're going to come in with a cease and desist order, then we need to add an additional condition of approval, that that waiver be granted by the state, before the plan can be, go forward, right?
Okay.
Like a wetland permit or a alteration of terrain or any of those other required permits.
Yeah, and I will double check with Fire Marshal Toomey to see if he will require, if the board approves it at the 18 feet, I will check with the state fire marshal to see if he's going to require a waiver. He may not.
Well, we have to, if he does, we have to have it in the conditions of approval tonight, so we can't, like, guess.
Is there a suggestion? How do we put it?
We don't have to decide this now, but I'm just
Right.
suggesting that there may be some complexities about how we word this, that we ought to think about, if we decide to allow it to be 18 feet going forward. And then finally, my other comment about there's a plumbing supply house, is that what we were talking about?
Sure. Before you go there, could I just comment on a couple of things?
Sure.
So Mr. Chase brought up a good point in terms of the turning in with the bucket and such. And I just want to let you know that our entrance into this, there's a wider radius than is needed at the beginning when the sweep is in. Much more pavement than is needed there. And that is by design, so that as this one-way starts, it's a sea of pavement. And it's going to be clearly marked, and trucks can get in there. And that was done for the fire department. The second thing I just want to mention is, I don't know if you could make it a condition to the fire marshal to me if it's not a shall, if it's a suggestion of theirs, when we meet your regulation of 18 feet already.
Well, that's where I was trying to go. It sounds like dueling jurisdictions. I know the local authority having jurisdiction, can make things more stringent and can interpret them more stringently than the state or certainly than other communities. And so if there's a fire code that the fire department says has to be met, I don't know whether either the state or the Derry Fire Department, if it was not met and the waiver were not granted by the state fire marshal, that someone would get a cease and desist order. I just want to know where this is going to go, because if we leave this dangling, it could come back
And
in
I would
a surprising
agree.
way.
Yeah, I would agree that you need to cover your tracks. I'm just trying to suggest if it's a shall or
So I guess, let
suggestion.
me ask another
meet your
silly question,
regulation.
since could we make the pavement 20 feet wide in those just few spots that are critical?
There's
No.
2 spots.
Doesn't work.
Okay.
We tried.
All right, so.
We also
Chair, I
tried
have
to
a question when you-
reduce.
Okay, you want me to give you a question, then I'll come back for a second bite? Is that
No,
what you
go
want?
ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, my question is on the
I'll come back to your
NFPA.
question.
Where this is a private road, does the NFPA have jurisdiction
I
on a
don't-
private road?
I don't have enough knowledge to answer that.
Yes, it's treated, if the municipality accepts NFPA codes, just like 2019 building codes, that is the codes that you need to go by.
Because if you follow the best practices, then basically what you're doing is accepting it as a may and not as a shall.
Yeah, but
So it's to be
like
permitted.
Mark will tell you, the building codes that the town has accepted, that's what must be met by the contractor. And this is similar.
Yeah, so I think what we were trying to highlight is that to the extent that these codes now encroach on regulating things that are traditionally site plan things, they say, well, I have a veto over what the planning board does. It's like, maybe, but if so, then maybe we need to fix our regulations so there's not going to be these conflicts.
Now, I have a question for, it's not on the sheet unless I've missed it. What is going to be the distance from edge of roadway, Rockingham Road, to the building once the corrections to the Rockingham Road are made?
So So he's asking this,
No,
I think.
Are you asking for the edge of pavement from Rockingham Road to the building directly, the
Yes.
shortest distance?
Oh,
The distance from edge of pavement on Rockingham Road to the facade of the building.
I'd have to scale it.
at its closest point. There's 20, 24. 22 and 10. 52.
52?
Mhm.
Okay.
All right, let's see if there's any other questions or comments on the NFPA issue.
And then
Um,
I'll try to answer your question about the plumbing, because I didn't want that to get.
Yeah, so
forgotten.
you said you're going to go to the ZBA and get a use variance, because one of the few things in this district that the planning board can't waive is use.
Sure.
And we had a similar situation with the old flea market area. Now, there's always a question that comes up, and no one is in the audience to ask it, so I will channel them and ask it. There was a vision for this district of walkable, village-type things where people could live and work. And so I guess the only question is, would the plumbing supply house provide the same kind of local work opportunities as a general office building?
Sure, and I just want to qualify what the plumbing company is. It is actually Mr. McCormick's Plumbing Company, a very successful company in Massachusetts that has a temporary office in Hooksett right now. They're looking to have a permanent location in Derry. They're plumbing, heating, they do work all the way to Boston, many, many, many things. And they're a professional office as well. They're a large operation. So it is professional offices as well as storage and other things below for the plumbing company. So I don't want it to be think of just as a supply house, and there may be extra offices as part of that could go to other uses. So I want to be clear. I think Mr. McCormick wants to come up and speak. Maybe not. If he does, we'll let him, obviously.
I don't know, maybe not.
Okay. So that's generally what it is, but we'll present that to the zoning board of adjustment as need be,
Okay.
Can I,
if that's an appropriate use.
if I could clarify the use a little bit? So there would not be outdoor, it wouldn't be like a contractor's yard with outdoor supply. It would be a corporate office in New Hampshire for McCormick Plumbing. So I believe you said there was maybe like 80 employees? Yeah, so about 80 employees. And, so to answer your point about, kind of live, work, play, obviously there's housing available on site, so that would be available to the employees if they so chose to work there. But it would be the professional office, some storage of their materials underneath, but not a contractor's yard. But by our definition in the zoning ordinance, we consider this a contractor rather than a commercial service establishment.
Would it be considered a warehousing use?
Primary use would be the,
Well, the secondary use? I guess where I'm going is, in this zone, we do have architectural design review, and I guess the question is, if the first floor is effectively a warehouse, does that change the exterior architectural design of the building?
no, the building will look exactly as you had approved it. The warehouse portion would be in the back, so around the back of the building, because it's built into it's going to be built into the land there. So it's professional office, storage of their materials, so they'll be running the company from that location. And if the board doesn't, if the board wants to look at some of the permitted uses that are allowed in that zone and see if it fits better in a different category, that would be okay too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments from members of the board? Mr. Melby?
Just to verify, this is only an issue due to you moving the building back at the town's request, correct? This was not an issue.
That is correct.
Okay.
That's 100% correct. We just assume build it in the front, because we have it approved. And by moving it back, we're very limited in how we can do that. We already made the building a little bit less wide,
Mhm.
7.5 feet, to accommodate this one-way traffic around.
Thank you.
Mr.
Did we
Meyer.
walk this a couple years ago in the summertime?
Yes.
We did, I think.
And we flew a
yeah.
balloon out
Yeah,
there.
June
Balloon,
30th.
yeah.
And it's pretty tough terrain. I can see that you have a problem. It's tough terrain back
Not anymore. Have you seen it? It's
there. No, I know. It's- The deal of what you're talking about, pushing the building back, is pretty tough.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, you gotta get close to one of the two mics.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want me to repeat all that.
Um,
I just recall going back there a couple of summers ago, all of us.
Mhm.
Yes,
And it was-
that's when the balloon
Yes,
was up in the
it was
air.
very, very
What's that?
thick.
We had the balloon up in the air for the
Well,
height.
yeah, with the string kind of going sideways, but yeah, there was.
That
yeah,
got
we-
tangled.
We did have balloons to look at how high the building height would be from the opposite side of the
Different
street and
vantage
whatnot.
points that we were, yep.
It raises a point of curiosity. Who in the town requested you to move the building back, and what was their reason?
I don't want to put in, okay.
Probably myself, based on
And me.
the road widening that's taking place for both projects. The junkyard and that project, the proximity to the face of the building would be within less than 10 feet or 12 feet to the edge of the pavement.
So that they were on their property, but what you're saying is with the movement of the road pavement, the pavement got close enough to the easement so that it
Well, close enough to the right-of-way, the building was only 10 feet away from the edge of the right-of-way.
okay, and that, the impact of that would be if they didn't choose to move it?
Well, similar to what, I've heard of a lot of comments about the Franklin Street condos that were just built and how they are forced to be within 10 feet of the property line. So it seems closer than what it actually is when in person. And when we reviewed those plans, we talked about it at length because of the widening would continue along that front for the junkyard instead of tapering like it does in this image. So we didn't want to I didn't think it was a safe or a functional design to have, main traveled way so close to the front of the building, the facade of the building.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, in the case of the Franklin Street, that's a district requirement because we want it to look like a traditional downtown. This is a little different.
Just think of winter maintenance when you're plowing at 30 miles an hour and you're winging snow.
Okay, so, I mean, I think that's a good thing, and the fact that these guys are willing to spend some money to accommodate that is a good thing. We just have to figure out, number one, whether they'll get the use variance that they apparently require. Although that's really a matter of tenancy, that's not a matter of actual construction, right?
Yes, correct.
So that's somewhat separable. And then we have to figure out what we do about the 18 versus 20 feet. Anyone have any thoughts about that?
So, in the real world, if there was a true emergency there, we're gonna go in the fastest way. That was my question to the roadway. At only 50 feet from edge of pavement to the front facade of the building, the ladder's 110 foot long, and it's only a two-story building. So it's well within reach from Rockingham Road. If it's needed in the back, they're not gonna go all the way around the building and try to set up. They're gonna come in, they're gonna make a right-hand turn, they're gonna go the wrong way and park in the back of the building. Let's face it, that's what's gonna happen. They're not gonna go all the way around. Chances are there'll be an engine there first, and they're gonna park in the front by the main entrance, and they're not gonna get by anyway. So, real world, the 20-foot really doesn't make that much difference. I'm sure Director Eastman might be cringing right now, but that's real world fact. There's book learning and there's street learning. And
Okay.
street learning says that's what's gonna happen. So, I'm not overly concerned as long as obstructions on the radiuses are kept to a minimum, mainly for the overhang and for the tail swing. Those would be the only two concerns that I have. I see tree plantings on the radius there. Those would be a concern depending on what they are and the height, and any signage that they put there would be.
Well, those seem to be more
concerns.
easily controllable.
Yes, those are more easily controllable. Other than that, you know, that 2 foot is not overly concerning to me.
On the original that we did back in June of '22, was there a street plan back there, inside there, without me going through all these documents? Can you recall if there
Was there a
street plan?
street plan, you said?
Because back then, Director Eastman did sign off on the TRC block, but there's parentheses that says conditional. So I'm just wondering whether or not the road was back there when we first looked at it.
The road did not go all the way around the building.
Didn't go around the,
Correct. So,
so the 18 feet may not have been there at the time.
correct.
Ah,
It was a
Right.
two-way, 24-foot wide aisle, but two-way. Just 12-foot aisle, if you will, but
So given all of the constraints, it sounds to me like our choice is the negative impact of having a building within 10 feet of a road where you could have, you know, plows or stones or even vehicles who are veering off the pavement impact the building, which is not a good thing, or
There's a big
a
ditch.
narrower than desired travelway, given the physical constraints of the property. And those seem to be the two options in front of us, unless someone has a better idea.
I would have to concur with Mr. LaRue that on that piece of road, given wider, giving traffic, stopping, turning, is a high probability of the building being struck. I would rather see it, it's much safer set back. And I have to agree with him on that.
There's a sheet that's not here, C5, but on the C2, in front of the building, it talks about a 10-foot wide open cut drench. Is that, how deep is that trench?
oh, I see what you're saying.
It says C detail on C5, I don't think I got C5 here.
Yeah, so I will say that this, this is an amended set, so there may be some notes on here that refer to the full plan set, and we only have the 4 sheets in front of us.
But
Jordan, there's a-
generally, the topography there is just a narrow, slight swell to pick up the water off the road, to pick the water up off the parking lot, and to
And it'll also
channel
take
it.
the snow, too.
Yes, but it's not a deep channel,
Okay.
not at all.
So I guess before we go too much further, try to structure motions, can I get a non-binding sense of the board as to, do we conceptually support the 18-foot travel lane as presented?
The fire department doesn't have a problem with it.
Well, this is a retired
yeah,
firefighter, it's not
the
the
fire
fire department.
department.
I understand. Mr. Chase has many years of experience. And I respect that.
It's good. The microphone?
Microphone, is it on? Oh,
I don't
maybe
have
the
a
green
problem
light
with
isn't
it.
on.
I don't have a problem with the plan as presented.
Okay, I guess the only other question, so we're gonna potentially waive the signature of the fire department on the plan set. And then are we gonna worry about whether the state fire marshal has a say in this or not, or are we just gonna roll the dice on that?
You could add a condition that says obtain any necessary approval from the state fire marshal for pavement width. And then if when I discuss it with Fire Marshal Toomey, if he says we don't need it, then we just say, okay, that's not required.
So you guys okay with the fact
Yes.
that the state fire marshal may be able to throw a monkey wrench into your works here?
Yes,
Okay,
that's understandable. That's fair.
okay. Any other comments before we close the public
If
hearing?
he requires a waiver, then we'll ask for the waiver as that next step.
And it would be from the state fire marshal's office, and
Mhm.
they have been known to grant them prior.
So I think there's a good case no matter.
Anything else?
Um,
And can we have a
just-
motion to close the public hearing?
I so move, Mr. Chair, close the public hearing.
Second.
Moved by O'Connor, seconded by Malamy to close the public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Okay, public hearing is closed. We'll move on to discussion of these 4 waivers as requested. Perhaps you would review them for us and indicate what the hardship is, because we typically like to see that.
We would love to, except we didn't bring a printed copy. So,
I have a copy for you.
thank you. Your new planning director is awesome. Saved by the bell.
Oh,
Yeah, you want to do it? I'll let Jordan do it.
Waiver number 1, the applicant is requesting a waiver to LDCR section 170-61A, the site plan checklist. Per the town's request, the applicant is moving building 1, the commercial building, away from Rockingham Road. The applicant has agreed to move the building with a drive aisle and parking between the proposed building and the right-of-way of Rockingham Road. This creates over 40 feet of separation from Rockingham Road.
Before he goes on from that, simply said, the checklist has already been done on the previous plan, so to require that whole full checklist would be,
And planning and engineering support that?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So shall we have a motion on that?
Mr. Chairman, I move to accept the first waiver of LDCR Section 170-61.A. You want me to
Second.
read the whole paragraph, or?
No, you just say as presented. So moved by O'Connor, seconded by Malamy to approve the waiver request number 1 as presented. I will poll the board. Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Mr. Healy?
Yes.
Mr. Grenice?
Yes.
Mr. O'Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Fishman?
Yes.
Mr. Feinauer?
Yes.
Mr. Myers?
Yes.
And Mr. Malaby?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. As to the second waiver?
The second waiver, the applicant is requesting a waiver to LDCR section 170-61A34, fire department signature on the TRC block. The fire department is requesting 20-foot drive aisles for the one-way drive aisle. Town of Derry requires one-way drive aisle width of 18 feet, which is being met. We request this waiver on for the proposed design to accommodate the town's request to push the building back as far as possible. The site has limited space from the right-of-way to the wetland boundary in the rear, as we discussed earlier.
All right, so we've discussed this extensively tonight. Any other comments or questions before we take a vote on this? If not,
Okay, Mr. Chair, I move to accept LDCR Section 170-61.A, parent 32, to not provide the fire department signature in the TRC block.
Second.
it's been moved by O'Connor and seconded by Malamy to waive the requirement for the fire department signature as presented in the waiver. We'll poll the board. Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Mr. Healy?
Yes.
Mr. Grenice?
Yes.
Mr. O'Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Feinauer? Fishman?
Yes.
Mr. Feinauer?
Yes.
Mr. Myers?
Yes.
And Mr. Malaby?
Yes.
Chair votes yes. Third waiver?
Waiver number 3, the applicant is requesting a waiver to the section 170-62A5 to construct a sidewalk along frontage for all non-residential properties. This section of Rockingham Road does not have any existing sidewalks and no plans for future sidewalks in this area. We believe it's not a safe area to have a sidewalk and promote foot traffic.
I will just suggest that we do have internal sidewalks throughout this project, throughout all the buildings, and as well as pathways through the woods out to a gazebo area and
Yeah.
whatnot.
I mean,
which-
I can remind everyone that when the planning board took the site walk on the site, we had to have a police detail to protect us from being hit on Rockingham Road.
Exactly.
Any
Mr.
questions on this, then? No?
Seeing none, Mr. Chair, I move LDCR Section 170-62.A, Parent 5, to not provide a sidewalk along the frontage of the project.
Okay.
Second.
Moved by O'Connor, seconded by Mallaby to approve the waiver. Number 3, as presented. I will poll the board. Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Mr. Healy?
Yes.
Mr. Grenice?
Yes.
Mr. O'Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Fishman?
Yes.
Mr. Feinauer?
Yes.
Mr. Myers?
Yes.
Mr. Mallaby?
Yes.
And chair votes yes. And then as to the 4th waiver?
Waiver number 4 is the applicant is requesting a waiver to 170-63A2 to allow parking drive aisle to be located within the front setback. This is a 10-foot setback, and as we discussed earlier, we are pushing the building back away from Rockingham Road while proposing 360-degree vehicular access around the building. And our limitations of space would require that parking within the 10-foot setback.
All right, any questions on that?
Seeing none, Mr. Chair, I'll move LDCR Section 170-63.A, Parent 2, to allow a portion of the parking drive aisle to be located within the front setback so that the wetland buffer in that area can be maintained.
Second.
Moved by O'Connor, seconded by Mallaby to approve the 4th waiver as presented. I'll poll the board. Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Mr. Healy?
Yes.
Mr. Grenice?
Yes.
Mr. O'Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Fishman?
Yes.
Mr. Feinauer?
Yes.
Mr. Myers?
Yes.
Mr. Mallaby?
Yes.
Chair votes yes. As to findings of fact, what is the board's pleasure?
Mr. Chair?
Sir?
On waiver number 2, it is actually the wrong number in the LDCR. It should be 34, not 32.
Yeah, there's a typo in the staff report.
I think
So it
we
should
need to
be
redo that
34?
one. Yes.
So will the clerk please note that amendment? Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a friendly amendment. So that's supposed to be 34, huh? Finding of facts, Mr. Chairman, the board finds the proposed change does not alter the findings of the August 17th, 2022 approval.
Second.
It has been moved by Mr. O'Connor, seconded by Mr. Mallaby to make findings of fact. I will poll the board. Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Mr. Healy?
Yes.
Mr. Grenice?
Yes.
Mr. O'Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Fishman?
Yes.
Mr. Feinauer?
Yes.
Mr. Myers?
Yes.
And Mr. Mallaby?
Yes.
Chair votes yes. And on the conditional approval?
Mr. Chairman, approved pursuant to, and after review and deliberation of the amended site plan application for PID 05039 Keystone Drive LLC, the board finds that the applicant continues to satisfy the general requirements of the West Runningbrook District and the Land Development Control Regulations, or in cases where the regulations cannot be met, has satisfied the waiver requirements. Therefore, the motion is to approve an amendment to the conditional use permit granted on August 17, 2022, pursuant to the Town of Derry zoning ordinance, Section 165-32.4.f and RSA 676:4, Roman numeral 1. Completed application within the following conditions, subject to the owner's signature. Incorporate the field edits suggested by the town engineer as well as the addressing of the buildings, and provide a full plan set to the planning and DPW departments, subject to on-site inspection by the town engineer. Note approved waivers on the plan. That's plural on waivers. Obtain written approval from the planning director / designee that the GIS submission is received and is operable and complies with LDCR Section 170-61.c. These conditions approved on August 17, 2022, still apply. Conditions precedent shall be met within 6 months.
And also to obtain any necessary waiver from the state fire marshal. Yeah.
Mr. Chair? Also, we need to approve the proposed construction sequence of the townhomes, buildings 1 and 4, and then buildings 2 and 3.
Now, was that part of the conditions? How did we specify that?
We hadn't yet, but that needs to be,
No, I mean originally.
we had specified
Is
that.
that notes on the plan?
I believe so, that commercial construction needed to be first.
That the construction, original condition was that construction would take place simultaneously, so this would supersede that.
Okay, so we've got the fire marshal, if he cares, waiver. Now, how are we gonna phrase that construction sequencing in a short sentence?
Under phases?
Do you want to, do you want me to?
So
So you could say, approve the proposed construction sequence, the townhomes, building 1 and 4, then building 2 and 3, and allow a CO to be, the COs to be issued for the townhomes while building 1 and 4 are being constructed.
Okay, that sounds
I will so
Yes.
move that motion.
straightforward.
Does that work?
So we have motion as presented plus 2 friendly amendments. Anything else?
Second?
Second. So moved by O'Connor, seconded by Malaby. And I will poll the board. Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Mr. Healy?
Yes.
Mr. Grenice?
Yes.
Mr. O'Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Fishman?
Yes.
Mr. Feinauer?
Yes.
Mr. Myers?
Yes.
And Mr. Malaby?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes.
Thank you so much for great discussion.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Okay. We now have a workshop. We talked about this at a recent meeting. There have been some changes in state law, which basically mean that parts of our zoning ordinance and land development control regulations on certain issues are now not in compliance with state law, which is generally not a good thing, so we need to fix that. And we had a memo from Ms. Robideau as to what those issues were, and we had some general consensus on the priority for addressing them. And so now we're actually going to go into some detail, and we have a package on that. And would you like to introduce that for us, Ms. Robideau?
Sure. So I went through all of the legislative changes, just to let you know where we don't need to change anything. State building codes, the changes were, our building codes were sent to the Building Code Review Board. They had some suggested changes, but that is a town ordinance, so that the building department is handling that, and we'll address that with town council, their suggested changes. We don't have authority over driveway permits. We've taken care of the solid waste landfill issue. That's been added to our regional impact determination memo. We comply with the manufactured housing suggested changes. When we update the master plan next, we can consider adding a solid waste reduction chapter. The 79E tax benefit changes, I reviewed that with the town administrator this week, and the way we currently have our ordinance written, we don't need to make any changes to that, and we also do not need to change anything based on health care, or the home health, the home child care, sorry. With regard to the definition of abutters, you have under section 165.4 in the zoning, or 165.5 in the zoning ordinance under definitions, a proposed change to abutter, and that complies with the state change. We also have the addition of a definition for Asian bodywork therapist, reflexologist, and structural integrator. That definition was taken directly from the state administrative regulations. Along with the abutter changes, there were changes to who can appeal a zoning board or planning board decision. We've made the appropriate adjustment in section 165-125. It is no longer a person aggrieved. You have to be a direct abutter in order to have standing for an appeal. So that has been addressed there, as well as in 165 and 128, motion for rehearing. We've removed person directly affected and changed that out for a butter. Along with the proposed change with the Asian bodywork therapist and reflexology, we don't have that currently as a permitted use in any zone, and we're suggesting adding that as a permitted use in the office medical business district. That's the district that's located close to Parkland Hospital. There are already two such establishments in that zone. So we thought that might be a good, an appropriate place to put those.
Okay.
And then, so before I move on
Can I ask a
to
que-
parking,
Mr.
are there any
Chairman?
questions?
Excuse me, can I ask you a question
Mhm.
about that?
Yeah,
So that would restrict those businesses just to
To
that
that one
district? So they
zone.
won't be able to go anywhere throughout the whole town?
correct.
Okay,
Correct,
I just
yeah.
wanted to
Mhm.
make sure I spell that out for the public.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, and so this is all under definitions.
Definitions and Asian bodywork, correct?
Oh, and I have to say, I love that antiquated word, abattoir.
Avatar. Mm-hmm.
Isn't it a movie?
That's Avatar. Okay.
Yeah, this seems all pretty straightforward. I mean, the limitations on abutters wouldn't be my preference, but the state legislature has spoken, so it is what it is.
Can I ask you a question real quick?
Yes.
Are you talking about the change to section 165, 125 appeals?
Well, yes, and also the 50 feet, because I think previously we had included a larger radius for our own abutter purposes.
Well, my question is, so these are changes that it's not Derry doing it, we're doing this to be in compliance with the state
In
legislation.
compliance with the state,
So
yes.
in the past, any person aggrieved could bring an appeal. Now that's been limited to just abutters.
It has been.
Yeah, I don't like that, but we
They've
can't do anything about
reverted,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, my
Yeah,
sentiment
they
exactly,
reverted back
but-
to it. Yep.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you. All right. And
Same
if-
thing for a motion for a rehearing, right?
Correct. And the LDCRs don't need to be amended because we do have that 200-foot distance, and because we go any property out 200 feet, we don't have to worry about that perpendicular lines hitting wherever.
Yeah, I guess my question, though, in putting the 50 feet in the definition, can we still put 200 feet somewhere else in our documents?
Yes, so this change is specifically for the zoning ordinance, so it would really apply to zoning board of adjustment notices. The planning board regulations, we can be more broad as far as who we notice. So because we go out 200 feet, that's more than 50, so we're good, and we don't need to change the LDCR.
So basically, we'd have two different
We do.
dimensions for a butter determination, one for zoning, one for planning.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, currently, the zoning ordinance notifies any property that touches the subject property.
Okay.
All right. So if there's no questions, I can move on to,
So you included,
Parking.
and this is a mouthful, Asian bodywork therapist, reflexology structural innovator in OMB. And is that only in one limited area of town?
yes, it's the district around Parkland Hospital.
Because we used to have a couple of them, but I think maybe we rezoned them over the years.
We did. Right.
Okay.
So, question, just to clarify, anybody from the public, 'cause I know this has been a hot topic issue in town. So the current ones will stay on the current use?
They
And
will.
if this is all changed, if they were to close, they'd have to go in just in this one district?
Correct. So any existing facility would be allowed to continue to operate under the same name.
Right.
At its present location. If this is approved and once it goes into effect, if we receive a change of use for one that is in the general commercial zone, they would need to seek a variance because they would no longer comply.
And OMB is rough area?
So roughly it is, OMB is around, like where the Birch Street Auto.
Yep.
On Birch Street, and it kind of goes up towards Parkland
Parkland.
and wraps, and I think it stops right around Rite Aid.
Okay, so it's just in that,
Mhm.
excuse me, just small
Yes.
general area.
Yes.
Thank you for the clarification for the
Mhm.
public.
And so the other areas of town which are sort of a center for medical offices and practices along Shanita Road, that is in a, was that industrial district? What is that?
That would be General Commercial 2 is along Shanito Road.
So those medical buildings are allowed use in general commercial?
In general, yes, that was specifically set up to be more of a medical office park district originally.
Okay. I guess the question is, given that existing infrastructure, would it make sense to allow these other quasi-medical practices to be in the same area? No?
Given the, given that there will likely be, there's only one lot left available there for redevelopment, and everything in that district is either it's either a medical, existing medical office with medical practices, and, or Bentley. I don't know that this particular type of use would locate in one of those office buildings.
Okay. Very
So
good.
I, it's up to the board, of course, but I'm not sure it would be appropriate in that zone.
Right, just, Mr. Chairman, just, I know we've talked about different types of businesses over the years with zoning, and I think it's the same like, and I'm not putting this with sexual orientated business at all, but that's in a specific zone, in one zone. And I think where Ms. Robideau said, there's already a couple of businesses in OMB, and I think just that area, I think that's a great spot for it. So I think if we limit to where it is, we can get other businesses and more. Shanita Road was more, I remember when we rezoned all that, I remember when that was all vacant land, and we wanted office, medical, doctors, stuff like that there. So I think it's a great idea, in my opinion only, but it's up to the
All
board.
right, so maybe the wording in the definition is a little bit politically correctly worded, because I didn't take any of that out of that, but we can talk about that afterwards.
Oh, understood. Okay.
Okay,
All right.
so then we have this one on ADUs.
ADUs. So this falls under the parking category. The new regulation from the state says that we cannot, we can require one parking space, not four. So I think that it would be appropriate to change 16525C to off-street parking shall be provided for at least one additional vehicle for the ADU, but I wasn't sure how the board wanted to word that.
So you're suggesting strike 4 vehicles and substitute 1 additional vehicle?
Mm-hmm.
What does the board think about that?
I have no problem with that.
And
Okay.
And while we're on the subject of ADUs, now might be an appropriate time for the board to discuss whether or not the board, since we're going to be changing this section, if the board would like to consider allowing detached ADUs with specific size parameters.
So, yeah, I mean, maybe you could give us the background in this. I know that's part of the overall affordable housing discussion,
It is.
and something that many advocates in the state are pushing for.
Yeah. So ADUs are considered affordable housing. The new change to the state law with regard to ADUs, municipalities shall allow ADUs by right in any zone where we have single-family residential, which we do, we allow that. We don't need to change that in our regulation. The law change, I think last year, allowed municipalities to may provide for detached ADUs. In Derry, we have permitted in the last year to 18 months, 17 ADUs. So we've added 17 units of affordable housing through that mechanism. The ZBA continues to get requests for detached housing, for detached ADUs.
That's
yeah.
a fancy term
For an in-law.
in-law apartment?
In-law or granny flat, yep. So the way the regulation works now, you can either, where it's attached, it has to be attached. The person who owns the property can either live in the ADU or they can live in the primary residence. And they have the option to rent either side, if you want to put it that way. So if I had an ADU, I could live in the ADU and rent my 4-bedroom house. And so this is one of the ways that the state is trying to get a handle on the housing shortage without creating uncontrolled growth in towns.
So, Mr. LaRue, do you have any thoughts on my concerns about attached versus detached? Obviously, if it's an attached ADU, it can easily share infrastructure such as water, heat, electricity, waste. If it's a standalone separate ADU, there's at least certain potential for requiring separate provision of all of those utilities, including, water and wastewater. The heat and the electricity probably aren't too bad, but what do you think about that?
He has no choice.
You have to look at the lot sizing, obviously. If you have public utilities accessible to your property, if you do, I've seen a few within like our water system where they had to run an additional water service for metering, additional electric service. You start looking at those things, whether you have an attached or detached. If it's attached, you can usually do internal plumbing, but if you're in a place where there's no municipal sewer, then you're talking about overloading a leach field, so then you have multiple leach fields, things of that nature. So you're spacing, your lot sizing, your spacing, those things all come to play. The number of bedrooms that you can attain based on your soils or whatever. There's the utilities, and then obviously all those things impact costs. So depending on the size and the space that you have on your property, and just general access to the roadway.
Yeah, so the two things kind of work, I guess, against each other, right? If you were to say, we will allow detached ADUs that have separate utilities in districts that have town water and sewer, then you solve the problem of subsurface waste disposal systems. But those lots typically are smaller and may not physically fit a detached unit. You may be forced to go with an attached unit. So that's kind of working against each other, right?
What I typically see are people building a separate garage and having a living unit above the garage. It's typically what we see.
But ADUs would have to have all of the utilities required for residential occupancy, right?
Yeah.
They would, for lots that have existing septics, they need to prove that the lot can handle the additional load on the septic system. So if the lot has a 3-bedroom septic plan and it's a 3-bedroom home and they're adding an ADU, even currently where it's attached, they need to have a septic plan, a replacement plan revised to handle 4 bedrooms.
Yep.
And then what happens is, when and if the existing system fails, then they have that plan in place, and then they reconstruct it.
So that would be very specific as to
Correct.
where the detached ADU was in relation to the existing septic tank and whatnot, and whether you could run an underground line there feasibly without pumps and whatnot, right?
Yep.
Right.
Mr. Chase?
So the bigger problem that I have with the ADUs, detached ADUs, I have no problem with ADUs. I do have a problem with detached, as it is against 165.8, which states there will only be one dwelling unit per lot. So now, once you say, well, we'll allow detached ADUs, now we have a problem of people wanting a separate dwelling unit and saying, wow, this is an ADU. If we're gonna allow that, there's gonna have to be some very, very, very strict regulations so that somebody's just not throwing up another single-family house on their lot. We have run into this in the past.
Then the definition of an ADU is that it's not an additional dwelling unit. It's an addition to an existing dwelling unit. It's not an expansion.
Correct, but once it's detached, now it's its own dwelling unit.
Right.
Which is against 165.8.
Well, if it has to be below a certain size.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
They would have to be heavily regulated on size and what you can do, plus, depending on, as Mr. LaRue said, lot specific. If they don't want it near the house, now you're looking at additional curb cuts, you're looking at a whole myriad of issues that will come up. So I'm not in favor of detached ADUs. I think they should stay attached to the primary dwelling unit.
So, I don't know, Mr. Connor, are you following this at the general court? Is there a movement toward, basically, at the state level, prohibiting local ordinances that only allow a single dwelling, unit on a parcel?
And it goes back to the single family. If that district has a single family on there, then they can go ahead and put the ADU in there.
No, I'm asking, is the general court trying to throw all that out? Because they are,
No,
they are
that's-
stirring the pot in a
it's
bunch
getting-
of ways,
it's
so I'm
getting
just asking what they're
stronger.
doing.
You made up this discussion in Rochester and Plymouth area now is the micro homes. And some of them already setting up on, even with an acre lot. So some businesses can bring in, which would be ideal for Parkland, because a lot of the people at the nurses there, what they call traveling nurses, and most of them come from out of state, and they're looking for places to stay. So the thing is, the state is looking to put more different types of ADUs.
So it sounds like, from a strategic perspective, providing more affordable housing, because we have a housing crisis, it's a worthy goal, but it sounds like the complexities of getting this right are such that maybe we should defer this to another
We can.
round of changes. Yeah.
We can. I just wanted to,
I mean, you
Spark
pointed
the
out we had
conversation.
the thing open up and we could make the change now, but my opinion is like, maybe we need to
that's
go
perfect.
forward with all the
Okay.
mandatory stuff, and then
Okay.
at some point, put this on our
Yeah, because
work plan for a future, more in-depth review.
Workforce housing is a whole different spectrum altogether. You've got percentages, you've got medium pays, you've got a lot of different calculations for
Okay,
becoming a workforce house
okay.
Mm.
All right,
versus an
so-
ADU. Because an ADU, you can have a $2 million ADU, whatever you want.
All right, so we'll defer this, and I'll keep it on the future list of changes. To continue the discussion about proposed parking changes, I did look at all of the districts and regulations to see where we needed to make changes. Office Business District, we'll need to amend that. Currently, we say it needs a minimum of one space per bedroom with a minimum of 3 spaces per dwelling unit. We'll need to change that to 1.5 per dwelling unit in instances where there's 10 or more units proposed. A minimum of 3 parking spaces per unit are required for residential uses containing less than 10 units. So once you hit that 10 unit, you go to 1.5 per bedroom.
So I assume that the logic there is in large, density, multi-unit not everyone's home at once, and so you can kind of play the float on who gets to park where.
Yeah, it's true. We could change this because we do address parking in our LDCR, and that's where really all the parking calculations live. We could address changes in the OBD, just to amend paragraph A to say that off-street parking shall be in accordance with the provisions of Chapter 170.
That sounds more practical to me.
I like that.
You know, zoning typically covers dimensional and use issues. I don't know that we need to put what is effectively a site plan review thing in the zoning ordinance.
Okay.
How does everyone feel about that? Do it by reference as opposed to change it?
Seems cleaner.
I don't hear any objections, so that, yeah,
Okay.
let's
All
do
right, We'll
that.
do that, okay. The TBOD, no changes are required, we meet the standard. For independent adult community overlay, the change here would be that we can still require 2 parking spaces per dwelling unit, but where there's 10 or more units, we would need to decrease that to 1.5. And right now, our LDCR, there was a conflict between the zoning ordinance and the LDCR with regard to parking for the elderly housing. I think that we're okay with the proposed change to item 7 and leaving the LDCR alone.
Is this another one where we would potentially reference the requirements as opposed to put them in the zoning?
We could,
So to be consistent?
if the,
Are you saying that the current LDCR 17063C states 1.5, but this is saying
2. Mhm.
So the assumption is that the elderly units should have more parking? Is that intentional?
I think the way that it was originally written, yes, so that, you know, each person, they have 2, most of them have 2 bedrooms, so each person living in the bedroom they'd each have a car. I think that's how it was originally intended. But we could put the same wording in there with regard to parking and just defer to Chapter 170. In Chapter 170, we have it at 1.5 spaces per dwelling unit. That would meet the, it would actually decrease our parking calculation for any project that had less than 10.
I mean, I like the
Units.
idea of referencing it wherever we can,
Okay.
because
Okay.
if we get a site plan for a multifamily development, we deal with the parking as part of the site plan review. But the way it's structured now, if they wanted to change the parking, they couldn't get a waiver from the planning board, they'd have to get a variance from the zoning board.
Okay,
Seems overkill.
okay. We could do that. I can change the wording on that.
Do we have a definition for elderly, besides me?
Hey, I'm in that 55 and older club, so it's almost all of us sitting here, not Rich. I think we do.
I know, elderly is a state of mind, John.
It is, it really is.
But that is a good question, though. If there are projects that are labeled elderly and then someone can't, figure out what that really means, that might be an issue.
So we don't specifically define it in our definitions in the zoning ordinance. In the independent adult community overlay, we call it an independent adult, and that would be persons 55 years of age or older.
I suspect that using the word elderly in a regulation is probably frowned upon.
All right, so I can make that change to 165, 150. And then moving into the LDCR, under the parking requirements, When you go under section C4A, for multifamily dwellings, this is where we kind of need to take a look at the wording. Right now, we're saying 1.5 spaces per bedroom with a minimum of 2 per dwelling unit. When there's less than 9 units proposed, that would be the change to comply with state law. In the TBOD, currently, we only require 1 space per bedroom with a minimum of 1.5 per dwelling unit for multifamily. The proposed change is also to add for studios and 1-bedroom apartments under 1,000 square feet in size, where such units meet the definition for workforce housing under the RSA. The requirement would be 1.5 spaces per unit. For developments of 10 units or more, the calculation is 1.5 spaces per unit. And then the next section immediately below would include we should change that elderly to independent adult housing.
I suspect that independent adult is the new
Mhm.
buzzword for elderly.
Okay.
Good.
Are there any, and then that would be those would be the only changes in the parking section.
I'm sorry, maybe I'm missing something. Is
No, go
there
ahead.
not a conflict there between requiring 2 spaces versus 1.5 spaces?
We can, the state requirement says that it's 1.5 if there's 10 or more units.
Okay.
So we're okay with saying that it could be 2.
And maybe I'm getting hung up on the word elderly here. Sorry, Mr. O'Connor. If we're thinking elderly, do we need wider spaces? Do we need to be thinking about footage, or am I out of line?
That's in a different section of the land development control regulations.
Okay.
Mhm. Yeah, so, for this particular change, we're just talking about the number of parking spaces, not how it's
Oh,
constructed.
okay, all right.
Yeah. And, this is an opportunity if the board wants to also change the parking, the parking calculation for multifamily, we could remove that. We could remove the wording that says with a minimum of 2 spaces and just leave it at 1.5. That would be up to the board.
So is there data, I mean, have we had any developers recently come to us and said, we built this in Nashua, we built this in South Carolina, and we have found that the typical number of vehicles per unit is X, Y, Z?
We have. We had I know that when we were talking with the developers for 19 Elm Street, they provided data showing that they did not need the parking density that was required in that zone based on their projects in Salem and other communities. So they had hard data to support that. It's always kind of a toss-up because our 1.5 spaces is pretty generous. We don't require as much parking as other communities do. We do meet the state intent. But the toss-up is that we also are not on a mass transit corridor. So, there's, how do you balance that? It's easy for Dover to say, we're going to put up a 16-unit apartment building, and we're not going to require parking calculations at all. And people can just go find parking where they will, but they also have mass transit right there.
Well, I guess my preference would be, this is gonna have to come back for, turn my mic off.
Okay.
This is gonna have to come back for a second reading, because we're making some changes, and maybe you could provide a backgrounder sheet, drawing from some of that, 19
19 okay.
19 what street?
I will, yeah.
Elm, that we could look at and say, yeah, that makes sense, or we could adopt that, or not, because, and then my other silly engineer questions, supposing the building has an odd number of units, How do you end up building the fractional parking space?
We round up. We have that in our regulation,
Round it
that
up.
we round
It
up.
says that somewhere else?
Mhm, it
Okay,
does,
cool.
yep. So, do you want me to, for the next reading, do you want me to remove the, where did it go? Do you want me to remove that, just leave it at one, for multifamily, one space, or 1.5 spaces, or do you want it to still say 1.5 with a minimum of 2?
I think you could actually put both in there in parentheses. We, choose one or the other, and then we look at the data, we would see what makes sense, because in the absence of all the data behind these mandates from the state, I don't really know what the logic is, so I need to get brought up to speed. I don't know how about other members.
Okay.
Nice to see data.
Yeah.
All right, we'll do that. Any other questions on parking or changes? Okay. And then, so the last section is to add provisions for the Technical Review Committee. The Town of Derry has, for a very long time, had a Technical Review Committee. For those members who aren't aware, before plans come to the board, they are reviewed internally by staff. That's where we get that TRC signature block. Applications are brought to the town, reviewed by planning, public works, fire, police. Who am I missing? Conservation also reviews, but separate from the Technical Review Committee. They have their own review process. In our submission requirements, we say that the applicant has to get the plan signed by all of those departments before it can go to the planning board, but it doesn't specifically reference the process. We have no formal iteration of it, so that's what this does. So we'd like to add a new section, Technical Review Committee. We've outlined the purpose of it, which is to provide coordinated review of development proposals to ensure compliance with the requirements of the ordinances, regulations, and codes, and to make sure all departments are aware of the upcoming projects so that they can assess and plan for potential impacts. It's important for the CIP and for department planning to know what's coming. We note the composition of the TRC, and we've also suggested here when TRC would be required. Some plans, some lot line adjustments really don't require a full in-depth review, but there are times, and we've had occasions where a lot line adjustment will change something dramatically, and it needs review by all the departments. So there's suggested wording here for what should and shouldn't go to TRC. We outline the procedure and when it's due. We also add the, under the fees and costs, we add the TRC fee, which is actually iterated by town council on the town fees, but it's not in our LDCR. The other thing we wanted to add while we had the opportunity was we occasionally get amended subdivision applications, and we don't have a fee structure for that. We've just kind of been saying, $100, and that's how we've been doing it, but that should be formalized. And then moving into the final application phase submittals, on the subdivision side, 17024, item A22, that's where we have the existing wording about getting the signatures. I kind of highlighted that. I didn't make any changes to that, but I might suggest that we say, prior to the submission of the application, the applicant shall, how did I word that? The applicant shall submit to the TRC as outlined in LDCR 170.51. And I didn't know if you had better wording than that.
Well, so, a couple of comments. One is this was at my request, because state statute allows the planning board to delegate an administrative body to do minimum site plans and pre-review, but it is a delegation that has to happen from the planning board, and it had been happening ad hoc, but we now have a documented proof of the delegation, and that's what this would be. With respect to the signature block, we just waived signature, so we have to be careful about how we write that if we anticipate potentially doing that in the future.
So you could keep that in, because if you do add the TRC section, it designates when and how you go. You could actually remove that entire last sentence that says, you know, prior to submission of application. We could get rid of that whole thing and just leave it that the block shall be on the cover sheet and you shall get it signed by.
Yeah, I mean, because it, technically, if signatures of all the department heads are a prerequisite to submission, that would mean it would never even get to the planning board without a signature, so we could vote on waiving it. It just seems like there needs to be a way to deal with that.
I will add that a lot of the work that goes in for the tech review committee is to work towards plan completeness. So in order, you know, we kind of look at that, that level of is the plan acceptable to, for you to vote for a jurisdiction? That's the primary basis for that signature. That we've talked about ad nauseum at times in our office, because somebody says, you know, one department says, well, this isn't complete, or another one says, well, I think it's complete enough to go. We have that debate sometimes, but usually that's the whole idea behind the whole signature block.
So effectively, the signatures are advisory. The town department saying,
Right.
yeah, we stand behind this, we think this is complete. We actually had one developer who wanted to bypass that process and come directly to the board, as I recall.
Yes.
Yes.
And technically, you know, the board has the ability to determine what is a complete application.
Only the board
We don't
can.
fully delegate that to staff, so we just have to figure out, I don't want it to sound like you have to have all the department signatures, and some department can simply stonewall and prevent a plan from ever being submitted to the board for consideration for waivers if they haven't signed it, because that could be messy.
It's difficult because at times it's just, sometimes developers want to get on, you know, on the docket, and they don't want to finish. They tell you this should be good enough, and we're just going to do a conditional approval. And at times we've pushed back and said, no, you can't get approval for like a site development without any roadway improvements.
Well, so,
We've had that happen in more recent times, and
yeah, there's always the folks who don't see things the way they're intended. That I view the TRC as the friend of a developer,
yes.
right? Because if you
yes.
come in with something half-baked, the planning board is going to reject it, and then you have to
Right.
start all over again.
Right.
Whereas if you talk with the TRC, say, the planning board's going to want to see this, then they, you know, cue themselves up for success. The other thing that we may consider at some point describing, we have the TRC, and the TRC seems to be often supplanting the review function of our external consultant engineers. And so what is the threshold for when we actually send a plan set to our external consultant civil engineers?
If there's extensive drainage, and it usually anything more than a 3-lot subdivision. So if it's sometimes 3-lot subdivisions, if there's extensive drainage or road construction, that will go for the peer review. But generally, the threshold is if it's a 4-lot subdivision or a major subdivision, that will go, or anything more than so a site plan would go.
All right, if that's algorithmic, you might actually fit that into this section somehow. And if
Okay.
it's literally a judgment call on your part, then maybe that's harder to describe. But I'm just thinking maybe referencing the fact that the planning board does, in certain applications, require the applicant to submit to the external consultant and pay for their services.
I'll have that for the next meeting.
So does anyone else have comments about the TRC process?
So on the 34 section,
Mhm.
maybe just changing the word obtain to solicit might make it, you shall solicit, but you don't have to receive it in order to come to the board.
Well, that's actually the 22 in yellow and the 34 in yellow, which are basically covering the same thing. Are we going to do the same wording in both of them?
I'm sorry?
There's two sections highlighted in yellow. 22 says a block shall be placed, and then 34 says a block shall be placed. They both seem to cover the same subject material.
That's right. I mean, I suppose my comment would apply to either or both of them,
Okay.
so whichever one remains. And I'm simply saying that, to the point you were making about, so the TRC can't effectively block the submittal from coming to the board. The language could just be changed to, instead of obtain signature, which implies that you have to have the signature in order to come to the board, if it's simply the applicant must solicit the signatures of the TRC.
Yeah, and then the board can raise questions like, why is that signature not here?
There's two different articles.
Mr. Chase?
So, reading this, it says that they shall review the proposed site plan with each party noted and obtain said signatures. But it doesn't say that if they can't obtain one signature, that it cannot be submitted to the planning board.
Yeah, it kind of leaves that up to interpretation.
So if they say there's one person or one entity that refuses to sign it, it doesn't mean that that plan is dead. That I interpret it that they still have the right to submit to the planning board. And then the planning board decides what they want to do with that missing signature. It has been done in the past.
Okay, I mean, is this something that, does the staff, obviously, I was about to say, do you ever, you have, in the case of the recent plan, submitted plans to the planning board without one of those signatures, so
We
apparently
have,
that flexibility you feel you already have.
yeah, we do routinely do that. There's been instances where DPW hasn't signed the plan and we've brought it to the board. Very rare. We had the instance tonight where the fire department didn't sign the plan and we brought it to the board. I'm not sure how to address the, because you're right, it's almost like a chicken or the egg thing. If you don't have the signature, how do we accept jurisdiction? Because that's part of the checklist without a waiver, because you can't vote on a waiver without accepting jurisdiction. So I'm not sure how that, Mr. Fishman brings up a really good point on how we do that, but we also don't want applicants willy-nilly just being like, well, I don't need that, and they're just gonna submit to
Right.
the board, so.
Perhaps a change to the signature block could resolve it, where you need to have a signature, but there's a place for a member of the TRC to sign that they've reviewed it and not approved or not recommended approval, or whatever the language would be. But it kind of forces review.
That
But
gets,
you raise a good point. If we literally strictly used that signature block as a criteria for acceptance, we'd never even get to vote on waivers.
Oh, right, and only the planning board by law can decide whether a plan is complete enough to accept jurisdiction. Staff
And
just
we rely on
advises.
staff and
Yeah.
other consultant engineer. We rely on other people who do this for a living to give us enough information to make an informed decision.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah, typically we try to stay away from, if we disagree with a certain item, not to sign. I mean, there's a difference between disagreement on a requirement versus a completeness of a plan, where the developer just decides, I don't want to go to that extent, this is going to cost too much money, I just want to do a bare bones submission.
Yeah, well,
That's
we
not
had
correct.
a counter-example to that tonight,
Mhm.
where the argument between 18 and 20 feet caused the signature to not be given.
Yeah, and that probably wasn't really an appropriate decision on that, for not signing.
So if the block provided,
It's very subjective, I guess.
Mr. Chase, you had a comment?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Mr. LaRue. There has to be incentive for the developer or the applicant to work with the TRC to meet all the criteria. But I also see the other side of it, that if a signature is not obtained, as Ms. Robideau says, it's only the planning board can determine whether it's complete or not. I think rather than striking something, if wording could be put in that if a signature is not obtained, it may, the plan, if after the parties have worked through the TRC as much as possible and a signature is not obtained, the plan may still be brought forward to the planning board to determine full compliance.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what
Leave it
has been
out.
happening.
Leave some kind of an out for the
Yeah.
applicant that,
Yeah.
they're not at a dead end if they don't get a signature. But they still need incentive to work with the TRC to get those signatures. Because that helps us a great deal. When a plan comes before us and the TRC has approved it, you're pretty well assured that it's a complete plan. We don't have to sit here for hours and review a plan to determine whether it's complete before we accept jurisdiction. We are mailed all the information, or emailed all the information, the packets, we can come in and get them, we can look at them beforehand, which is, what we should be doing so that we're prepared when we come in here. And we know whether there's something that caught our eye or we have questions about, and we ask them, and it's a very, very smooth process. And I don't want to derail that, but I don't want to stonewall an applicant either.
So maybe we just need to think about the differences in the concept of complete versus compliant.
Mm.
Yes.
Compliant means it meets all the
Yes.
regulations, but we always reserve the
Yes.
Yes.
right to waive things. So I'm gonna, trounce on the fire department here. They didn't sign it because it was not compliant to NFPA
Right.
section blah, blah, blah. But I'm gonna go out on a limb and say, it was complete, they just didn't like it.
Right.
Right.
And so I think there's a difference. You sign it if it's complete, got all the checklist items, or you sign it because you think it's compliant with whatever you need.
Right.
And maybe we just need to make a distinction there.
Right, and if they don't feel it's compliant, they can make notes.
They can write a staff report saying, here's my
Correct.
minority opinion.
This is what it, and we always get TRC notes anyway. So
Do we?
we should be able to say, yeah,
Sometimes we don't, but.
most of the time.
You haven't been for about a year.
Oh, that was another thing yeah.
Yeah, you haven't been for about a year, so,
It gets confusing when we have large projects, though, and we have multiple TRCs, because sometimes you get multiple copies or multiple versions, and a certain topic will cause an extensive discussion because people aren't certain that the issue was resolved.
And one of the
Yeah.
other things that Ms. Robideau brought up is during those discussions, there may be proprietary information exchanged with the applicant and the town. However, I guess my point is, by the time they get to a planning board submission, all of that is public. However, maybe to address the lengthy discussions, maybe we should ask for a final report from the TRC, and everyone can say, yep, no issues, Or I have these following issues.
That's what the signature is, so.
Yeah, no, I'm saying some
yeah.
words behind why you didn't sign.
Exactly. And normally we do get that.
Well, you pass out the minutes to everybody on the TRC.
That has not been occurring. And technically, TRC, without getting into a huge discussion about it, technically TRC notes are not subject to right to know. It's staff discussion because it's advisory discussion. It's not, because staff doesn't make decisions about
And
a plan.
I guess that's where I'm going with the
Yeah.
final report,
Oh,
because
yeah, okay.
we don't need to see all of the cooking, the sausage, we just need to be served the meal.
Okay,
And so if TRC will say, everything is fine except these 5 issues, that will be part of the public record, and we would consider that as part of our public hearing. And that separates out all of the, non-91A issues, because that report would be part of the package, which, as I say, is by definition public.
correct, okay.
And then you don't have to give us all how the sausage is made.
Yeah, because sometimes how the sausage is made, like, all the ingredients are already put in before it gets put in the oven, yeah.
Mr. Chase?
So, back to what I was saying about instead of striking from this paragraph, added something similar to meet with each party noted above and obtain signatures that plan is complete.
Yeah, I think that
And then we would have notes.
signatures indicate the plan's complete, and then ask the TRC to submit a final report making comments on any compliance issues.
Yeah. I think that would cover it better than trying to strike that last sentence.
Okay, I like that. Does anyone have a better idea?
Good
Is that okay,
resolution.
Mr. LaRue?
I mean, it does mean that someone on behalf of the TRC has to summarize the final result, but, I mean, you kind of do that for your staff report anyway.
That's what, I kind of created that staff concerns and comments section to address those issues.
Liz does a good job doing that.
Okay.
I just had one comment. On the, adding the new section, it says, "No plan will be presented to the planning board without all the required TRC signatures," on the new section being added to that line.
Which
What,
bullet
where?
number does that say?
Procedure, D procedure, number 6.
Number 6?
So the new procedure, we're also including no plan will be
Number 6.
presented.
All right, so we
Wait, where are we?
obviously have to strike that second sentence on 6,
Wait,
based on tonight's discussion.
where are you?
On the LDCR Part 1, add a new section,
Add new section, yeah.
D procedure,
Yep.
and then number 6.
Oh. Okay,
And again, the intent is so that if an applicant, for whatever reason, does not, if they choose to bypass the TRC, we're allowing that. That's the intent.
Yeah, I think the intent is that if there's not a signature, they can still choose to come to the planning board if they think they've got a good story. And we would expect that the TRC member who did not sign would write us a short memo explaining why not and what the issue was. I would not encourage departments to just not sign and not explain.
Right, it seems like almost, I don't know if this needs to be language in here or just internal communication, but the signature is always required. It indicates that it was reviewed, and then the additional
Well,
report is.
I think what you're saying is you gotta force the department to sign it if they think it's complete but they have issues, and I guess I don't know whether the planning board has authority to make that requirement. That seems like a town council or town administrator issue.
I assume the TRC was,
So the TRC are paid professional staff members.
yeah.
The planning board controls its own procedures.
Yep.
But we don't control the behavior of
Of
any
staff,
town
correct.
department,
Right.
much as some of us would like to sometimes, but we don't.
Yeah.
So that's why an out for, allowing the plan to come forward without a signature, as it did tonight,
Mhm.
is probably reasonable, although it should
Okay.
be an exceptional case, but.
Okay. So for this, under 6, I guess I would suggest perhaps adding the wording that Mr. Chase had suggested, that, no plan will be presented to the planning board without we can take all out, without the required TRC signature. Wording something to the effect that the department's signature indicates that the department believes the plan to be complete. And then we have and then in the section 22 and 34, under the sub in the site plan regs, we could just say that a block shall be placed on the cover sheet for the different departments for their signature, and then get rid of that last sentence.
Yeah, I mean, we already have the process, starting with the application, and the checklist, and the TRC. So you're telling the applicant they have to put a block on the plan?
They do anyways, but yeah.
So
yeah.
I don't know that you need to have another place that talks about, you can't pass go until you get the signatures.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
I do like Mr. Chase's suggestion that item 6 talk about the signature signifying completeness, and we need to maybe emphasize to everyone, that doesn't mean compliance.
Correct.
It means everything that the planning board has on its checklist has been addressed.
Okay.
So maybe you can wordsmith that and talk with the various department heads, see what
Okay.
they find acceptable, and then come back for the second reading with some text there that hopefully reflects what is the general consensus of the board on this?
Okay. Okay, we'll do that. Okay, and I think that concludes. Oh, just one other, there were just a couple of changes to how the GIS information is submitted. We're getting away from discs and CDs and all of that, so we're just saying digital. So we addressed that wording. And then the one last change is in section 170-19, general provisions. Our submission deadline, we had changed it to 21 days when the state law said it's 21 days and that's it. Then they changed it back to say that municipalities could have a lesser deadline, so you could have a shorter period. We never did change that. Currently, we're a 14-day submission, so we're just going to address that there.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I have one further comment. This is a question on really for clarity of language. On the new section C, bullet 2, the intention, well, let me just read the first sentence. Amended subdivision plans and amended site plans that do not amend access, increase intensity of use, change the building footprint by less than 10%, or do not affect the existing approved drainage. For the second kind of element, increasing the intensity of use, is the intention saying that plans which do not increase the intensity of use may be submitted directly?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would suggest maybe adding the negative there
Okay.
for clarity. It seems ambiguous.
Oh,
Yeah,
So just
it's an
adding-
English semantics thing, right?
That's all.
Yeah.
okay, thank you. Do
Just
not
saying,
or do not.
do not.
Okay,
increase.
thank you.
Any other thoughts, questions?
Yeah.
Are we good on this for the first reading?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this. This is a lot, so I appreciate the thoughtfulness.
All right, so we'll close on that workshop, and then we'll, at some point, have a second workshop on this. Now we're to board member comments. Anyone have a comment? Mr. Malamig?
We had our second meeting for the Gateway District Committee on 10/22. Unfortunately, we've been meeting on Tuesdays, and we had a couple folks who couldn't make it on the 29th, and then yesterday was Election Day, so we're gonna get back on at the 12th. At our last meeting, though, we were joined by Bev Donovan. We continued some extended discussion about the boundaries of the district. We got into a little bit of our goals, what we'd like to see, and also what we'd like to preserve in the current territory. So we're gonna look at that next meeting, and I think our planning director, Ms. Robodeau, is gonna put together a small map, perhaps something with the future roadways, and so what we'll be looking at in the future.
Okay.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other comments? Sort of out of role as my other role as town moderator. I want to thank all the voters in Derry who showed up and set a new voter attendance record at the election yesterday. Yay!
Yay. Yeah, you broke Tina's record.
Well, we broke someone's record.
Oh, I don't know if it was Tina's or not, but you
Maybe.
did, yeah, I just want to say, did a great job yesterday, yourself and the clerk and all the volunteers and the workers and stuff like that, and the people that come out to vote. It was an awesome turnout. Long day, so it was worth it, though.
And if there are no other comments, I solicit a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by O'Connor, seconded by Malamby to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We stand adjourned.